Okay, so now that we've got the basics of Rhino down with our blocky castle from a previous video, we're going to make a slightly more complex object, in this case a flashlight. And if you find it easier to follow along with the written instructions, you can find these online at for.rhino3d.com/4/help. This is an older tutorial, but I haven't found an updated version online, which is why I'm making this video. On the left-hand side, you would then click on Getting Started, Introduction, build a model with solids, and then you're here working on your flashlight. Okay, so to start off, we're going to make a cylinder, move the cursor to the right viewport, and the base of the cylinder is 0. So I'll just type in cylinder, see if I get lucky. There it is. Base of the cylinder is 0. Now we are interested in the diameter specifically, and we're going to make that 0.75. And we want this to be in the right viewport. You can see because I started typing it in while my mouse was hovering in the wrong spot, now I've constrained the flashlight to being vertical. So I'm going to hit escape, enter to repeat the previous command, go down to the right viewport, hit 0 for the base. The diameter is already set up as 0.75, looks good. And then the end of the cylinder is 5.5. You may see in this tutorial some of the numbers populate automatically. That's just because I've done this previously while I was practicing. You may have to write them in. Okay, so we want something that looks kind of like that. Okay, so once I have this shape, let's go double check. So that was so you can see already this thing looks a little bit fatter than the one I just made, and that's because the radius is supposed to be 0.75. So let's go ahead and do that again. Enter to repeat the previous command. Right window, 0. The diameter is not 0.75, the radius is 0.75. And one of the reasons that I leave these mistakes in is because this stuff happens all the time. See, there I've moved my mouse incorrectly, and so one of these days we'll get it right. Okay, 0. Radius is 0.75. Yes. End of cylinder is 5.5. That is what that thing is supposed to be looking like. Okay. Now we can move on. So it also tells us to zoom extents in all viewports, which means zooming in on the object and resetting the center of rotation. So sometimes you'll find that you try to zoom in on something with the mouse wheel and it just won't go anymore, and that means it's time for zoom extents all. So I get that through view, let's see, zoom, and zoom extents all, which is Option Command E on my Mac keyboard. Okay, something like that. Great. Okay, now we switch our perspective to ghosted mode. So right-click perspective, switch it to ghosted, and that means I can kind of see the inside and the outside. It's like half wireframe and half shaded. Okay, onward. Now the reflector shield, we want to do a truncated cone, although I think now it's no longer known as a T-cone. The base is going to be using a center O-snap right here, and then we know the radius at the base is 0.875. So to get to this one, because I forget how to type out this command, I'll find it in the solids menu underneath the box. So truncated cone. We want to make sure our center O-snap is selected, so I pick right here and then go down to the right viewport. And the radius at the base is 0.875. So I'll hit enter, and it should look like this, right? It should be just slightly bigger than the body of the flashlight. Now the length of this thing is going to be 2, and then the radius at the top is going to be 1. Okay, so we go down here, type in 2, hit enter, and then if you want, you can make a big-ass flashlight like that, but let's just stick with the numbers they've got. So we have 1 is the radius at the top, which gives us a nice, kind of a more realistic proportion. Okay, let's see what's next. So now we're going to go here. We're going to make a copy of this object and then just kind of scooch it out a little bit. They're not being very specific about it here, so we're just going to try to mimic what they see visually. And I'm zooming in and out with my mouse wheel and panning around with my right mouse button. I'm going to select this object in the top view and type in copy. And if I wanted to, I could use my O-snaps and so forth, but really we're just talking about copying relative one position to another. So instead I'm just going to have ortho checked and check grid snap, and I'll just click up here in space somewhere and then just kind of move things around like that. Now my grids are large enough that that's actually probably a little bit too far. So I'll turn off grid snap, and then I just want to do something kind of like that. We want to make sure that we're leaving some of that space behind. Hit enter once I've clicked and then made my copy, because I want there to be a wall right here once we're done subtracting one from the other. Okay, now join the two parts together. I think is that where we want to go? Yeah. So we're going to take the body of the flashlight and the original reflector shield and join it with what's known as a Boolean union. So Boolean is just a way of kind of comparing two things. It's a computer science term. So I'll shift select these two objects, and then the symbol for this are these two little spheres crashing together. So I'll click on that, and if it works down here at the bottom, it won't say that there was a failure. And now I should see that when I click on either one or the other, they both come up in yellow. So now these two objects are officially connected together. They're just one solid object. And solid modeling becomes really important as we move forward, particularly in the realm of 3D printing. So if you are working with solids, you want to make sure that you never accidentally poke a hole in something and reduce it to a set of surfaces. Okay, so that was our Boolean union command. Now we're going to use Boolean difference, which we can make a subtraction with as opposed to an addition. In this case, it depends, or rather it's important, the order in which you pick something. So if I just type in Boolean, in this case it'll be a difference. And first I select the surfaces to subtract from, right? So I want to take this object, hit enter, and subtract that object from it, and hit enter. Now depending on the options you have selected, I did not select delete the results. So everything's going to look more or less the same, and I have to take the deleted item, or the item slated for deletion, and delete it myself. And now I can look in here and see that I've got a nice skinny little reflector that's making up my flashlight. Okay, at this point they're also going to have us come in here and kind of hollow out the middle, which is where the batteries would be placed. So we're going to make a cylinder, and that cylinder is going to have a radius of 0.625. So I can come in here in pretty much any viewport. Let's use perspective. I'll pick a cylinder, pick up that center viewport, and then down here in the right view do 0.625 to make sure it's heading in the right direction. And then now I can just zoom out and make it extra long. You just want to make sure that it's sticking all the way out the front. So again, we do a Boolean difference where the flashlight is the thing to be subtracted from, and then this time I will select delete input and pick that guy. So it does that step for me, and now I can look all the way down the inside of my flashlight. But whoops, I've accidentally poked a hole in the back, right? So let's hit undo, which will bring back this object. And then I'll type in move. Oops, gotta spell it right. And you see ortho's selected, so it helps me just go straight out. So I could type in a really specific number, or I can just make a left click, which for our purposes in this case is fine. And then go back to Boolean difference. Subtract from you with you while deleting the input. And that's what we want to see. Okay, good. So now we haven't poked a hole in the back of our flashlight. Okay, what's next? Drag the cylinder away from the base. Boolean difference. We did that and that. Okay, now we're going to draw a little lens in here. So we know that the interior of this thing is 0.625, so that's the radius we're going to pick up again. And we're going to use the center O-snap to snap to kind of the interior of the flashlight. And this gets a little tricky. This will be interesting. Okay, so I'll pick my cylinder. I have center O-snap selected, but in this case I don't want that O-snap that's on the front of the flashlight, right? I actually want my O-snap to trigger all the way back here. And you see how I get a slightly darker outline of a circle when it recognizes that's what I'm talking about? So either of these ones will do it, because they're on the same plane. So I'll just pick that center right there and then left click. Now right now I'm about to make my lens face the wrong direction, so I want to come down into the right viewport and then type in 0.625 on the diameter. Okay, and then now if we look from the top, we can see here's the origin of the lens, and now I'm deciding how thick it's going to be. And if I'm not mistaken, I think this direction is negative in X. So let's see how thick they wanted us to make it. So they want this to be, it looks like they may not say. So I'll just come in here and just kind of left click it and make it as thick as I want it to be. So there, my lens is kind of sitting in there, and it's coplanar, at least one of its faces, with the beginning of the reflector. Okay, so we have our lens, and then finally they're going to have us put a little button on there, which is a sphere with a 0.4 radius. So I will, go to the solids menu, get a sphere, click right there, and then type in 0.4. So now that we have some more complex objects, it becomes a little more challenging to place things. Once I've created this sphere, let's use the alignment tool. So we know we want the little button here to be in the center of the flashlight as we look from the top. So with the button selected, I'll type in align, and then for alignment type, there's a lot of different versions here. So horizontal center means that I'm interested in aligning the center horizontally as opposed to vertically relative to this window. So I'll pick horizontal center, and then you see wherever I place the mouse, that's going to be in alignment with the horizontal center. So now I can use my O-snaps, such as center, and I can pick up the center of the flashlight. So that gets it aligned correctly, at least in this view. Now if we look from the right-hand side of the perspective, you can see that our button is actually floating inside the flashlight. So now I want to align the horizontal center relative to the right view. So I'll type in align again, H for horizontal center, and then I can drag this up until it's occupying a spot that I like. It might be easier to look at it from the front view now, actually. So for example, I could type in, say, quadrant, and I could pick up the top of this circle. You see in the perspective view how I picked that up right there. So once you get your objects even just get slightly more complex, this does get a little challenging. I'm also not super crazy about the way that sphere starts to exit the rounded body here, so I might finish this off just with a little casual positioning, so I get something that just kind of looks correct as opposed to is, an exact measurement. Okay, so that's the basics of making our flashlight. In the last step, we're going to give it some basic rendering so we can make it into a nice looking photograph. Now, we're going to go on in a later section of the class to working with V-Ray, which is a much more industrial renderer, and that'll really let us render our objects in a practically photorealistic state, right, so that we can make really believable images. In this case, we just want to see the basics that Rhino has to offer in terms of rendering. So if you go up to render, if you're working on the school's computer, the VDI, you'll have multiple renderers available here, or maybe if you've downloaded a V-Ray demo or something, you'll see multiples. But right now, I just have Rhino. This is on the computer I just work on that doesn't have V-Ray installed. So if I switch perspective to the rendered view, we just get something basic like this. And I'll click on one of these objects, and if the properties don't automatically pop up, you can press this little button here, this kind of Technicolor donut. I should also note that the tutorial we've been following up until this point, now it really does start to look outdated. So just forget about what they're talking about over here and follow along with what I'm doing. Okay, so we're looking at the Properties window, and then specifically I'm looking at the Materials section. By default, it'll say Use Layer Material, but we're going to switch over to making a new one. You can see I've already done this below, but you won't have any of these yet. So I'll hit New, and I have a couple of presets here, so let's just go with Plastic. And once we've picked Plastic, because I have so many, I might, I might call this like red flashlight body or something like that. The color, we will pick it off the wheel here and make that red. The transparency is 0, so it's completely opaque. There's some stuff here about reflectivity and that kind of thing. Maybe super reflective will look a little fake. Oh, that's interesting. It got rid of my name there. We're going to leave all the rest of this alone, and then we're going to get something that looks like that, so that's off to a good start. I can come in here with the lens and switch that from layer material. I can add one, and we can make this glass, which should be good to go right off the bat, although it's effectively completely transparent, which I think is a little challenging. So maybe if we bump down the clarity, we can make that work. And ultimately, if that doesn't seem realistic enough, we could just make a new material, call it plastic, and then bump up its transparency to something like that. And I think that actually looks even a little bit better than the glass material, even though the glass material is more technically true. So these are just the basics to get you to a place that you could, make a render and have it look fairly realistic. Clearly, right now, if we look too carefully, we can see our button sort of emerging on the bottom side, but we could take care of that with a Boolean difference to get rid of it. In any case, I'm just going to render this thing. Here, I'll do my little zoom extents so this looks nice. So we'll get ourselves to a place like that. You'll notice that in the preview render, sometimes you'll see things with overlapping edges that won't necessarily make it through to the final render. So I'll get it laid out in a way that I look, and then I'll just click on the render button. Now, depending on the speed of the computer which you're working on, this actually might take quite some time, and you might find that it makes more sense to downgrade the render settings so it's not quite as laborious. So here I'll stop that render. Come back and right click here on render, and I can go down and look. So maybe I can make the dimensions smaller, like 800 by 600. Well, it is only on draft quality. Let's put it on low quality. If I wanted, I could mess around with the background color. So maybe I'll just turn the background black. Or gradient could be cool too. So you can mess around with this stuff, and we'll get into lighting as well in a future episode. And now I hit render, and if this takes a while, I'll just edit it out of the video so you can see the results. There we go. And then you can see here, for example, the low quality is showing up in some of the sort of grainy edges and so on. So once you establish that you like everything, you set it up for a high quality render, and then just plan to let the computer sit for a while. If you're using the VDI, this goes pretty quick because those are nice and fast computers. So that's just the absolute basics on rendering. We're going to come back through in V-Ray and add a whole bunch of stuff to this in terms of lighting and camera effects and so forth.